Hey guys, Weep here. Today we'll be talking about the Mage class in Astellia. Before we talk about that though, I would like to make a little disclaimer that some abilities and cooldowns, etc. have been adjusted on some of the classes, moving over to global official release. Any information that has been adjusted and any theory crafting will be listed in the links below the video. So if you notice any discrepancies, feel free to go in there and check it out. Okay, so first up, let's talk about the difficulty of the Mage class. So the difficulty of the Mage class is set to be a 4-star difficulty. I personally am not entirely sure why it's considered a 4-star difficulty. I personally consider it more of a 3. It's harder than an archer, but nowhere near as hard as an assassin. It has insanely strong AoE, really strong AoE, and it also has a lot of CC/ debuffs. For example, there's combos that you can use to permanent freeze mobs, basically, so it is just insanely strong. Okay, so now let's talk about the cons. The damage amplifier is a debuff. Now, what do I mean by damage amplifier? So, for example, when you're using your basic single target rotation, which we'll be talking about in a moment, you put debuffs on the enemy, which is fire. And when they have more fire debuffs, you do more damage to them. But the problem is that, let's say, for example, I put 2 fire debuffs on this enemy over here. When he dies, this enemy over here no longer has them because they're a debuff. They're not a buff for me. They're a debuff that applies to each enemy individually. So I have to restack from ground zero. And it can be quite annoying when leveling up. Despite that, though, it is very powerful. Okay, so next up, the second con would be that you're limited by souls. Now, of course, any well-skilled player would be able to negate this. But you have a limited amount of souls that you can use. And what I mean by souls, I'm talking about arcane souls. Arcane souls are basically, think of them as tokens, and the tokens are used to use some of your most powerful abilities. For example, 4 of them are required to use Blizzard, or 4 of them are required to use Meteor. You can acquire some from using a buff, or you can acquire some from setting up certain combinations, which we will talk about. Let's discuss the single target rotation for the Mage class. So first up, we have the fire. So Ignite is a pretty quick casting ability that basically applies burn 1 to enemies, and you generally want to put this as your opener. I have Fireball here because it's more of a filler ability, and you can use it if you want, but you don't have to, because it doesn't actually increase the burn, so it's not as effective as some of the other abilities. So in here we have Flame Burst. Now Flame Burst does more damage depending on how many burns is done to the enemy, so you're not going to want to use this quite yet. Next up we have Hellfire, Burning Pillar, and Fire Stream. These are not necessarily single target abilities, but I'll explain why they're in this section of the guide. So, after you use Ignite, they're going to have Burn 1. You're then going to use Hellfire to give them Burn 2. Note that it has a 20-second cooldown. Then you're going to use Burning Pillar. Now, you can use Burning Pillar or Hellfire in whichever way that you want, in whichever combination, but basically you're going to use them one after another. And then Fire Stream is an AoE at the end, kind of like a filler if you wish to use it. So the combination that I personally use would be Ignite. So now he has 2 buffs on him. Now I use Pillar. He has 3 buffs. Now, if you failed one of these burns, then you can use Ignite again because you've waited for the cooldown. And now he's definitely at burn 3. And then you hit him with Fire Blast and you'll do a ton of damage. Now, if you were going to do that combo really quickly, the way it's going to look is you're going to do it like this. So you're going to use a filler ability to make up the gap. So you're going to go Ignite, Burn 2, Burn 3, filler ability, Ignite, and then Blast. But again, it all depends on whether or not Burn actually hits. That's why you add in the filler ability to give you a bit of extra time to wait for the burn buffs to tick up if you miss them. Okay, so that covers the basic rotation of the flame damage. So now let's talk about the filler ability. So we have Lightning Bolt, which I used as a filler. It does a bit of damage, but personally not something I would generally use because the flame combination is just that strong. As I noted earlier, the Hellfire and the Burning Pillar has decent cooldowns, so you won't be able to consistently use this combo. So when you can't, that's when you're going to use Lightning and other abilities to fill it out. Okay, so next up we have Ice Arrow, Ice Spear, and Crescendio. Now, so how this works is Ice Arrow will slow the enemy and do some damage. It has a very high status hit rate too at 98.8%. Next up, we have Ice Spear. Now, the reason that we're going to do this combination is because One slows them, and then Ice Spear, if they are slow, it will give them ice status, which will effectively stun them. Now, Crescendio, the reason it's on the end is because if they are stunned with Icebound status, which is what Ice Spear does, it does considerably more damage. But keep in note that you need 2 Arcane Souls to do this. So the combination for this would be like this. Okay, so now we have our Arcane Souls. We're going to hit him, do damage, and slow him. Then we're going to freeze him. Then we're going to use Crescendio. And that's basically one of the rotations that you can do to freeze and do some single target damage. Okay, so next up, let's have a look at Ice Hammer and Crescendio. So, Ice Hammer will hurl a huge ice at the target and inflict a bound status. So it'll immediately stun lock them, and then you can use Crescendio straight after, assuming that you have the Arcane Souls, to get the extra damage, just like this combination here. The reason that you have both combinations, though, is because Ice Hammer can put them in Ice Stun status by itself, while these two abilities cannot. And this ability here also has a 60-second cooldown. So you're generally going to want to use this combination because it does more damage, and because it has a lower cooldown than necessarily this one here. Okay, so that covers the basic single target abilities on the Mage. So now let's have a look at some of the AoE abilities. Okay, first up, let's have a look at the Meteor skill. So the Meteor skill is basically a huge AoE ability with a massive cooldown, and it uses 4 Arcane Souls, so it looks a bit like this. As you can see, it does quite a lot of damage, and you're going to want to use it after your freeze combos. So Blizzard is much the same, and we will talk about that a little bit later. Okay, so now let's talk about some of the freeze combos. So in here, we have Ice Field, followed up by Ice Wall. So Ice Field is going to slow everything inside the field. Again, keep in mind, slow. Now we're going to use Ice Wall to inflict slowed monsters with a freeze, a bit like this. He's now slowed, and he's now frozen. So that's a combination to do an AoE freeze with the Mage class. So next up, let's have a talk about the lightning ability, Static Shock. So Static Shock isn't necessarily an AoE ability, but it's more of a support AoE ability, which is why I put it into here. For example, this is how it works. It'll shock, and it will jump back. I consider it more of an AoE ability because it allows you to jump away and allows you to use your AoE abilities from distance, so I put it in the AoE rotations instead of the single target rotations. Next up, we have Lightning Shift. So Lightning Shift allows you to teleport backwards, kind of like this. As you saw though, you can use both in concession, so if you use Static Shock followed up by Lightning Shift, you're going to be able to jump some tremendous damage away from the mobs, and it can be used to kite really, really well. So next up, we have the Arcane Spirit. So Arcane Spirit basically increases your attack power and spell power, but it costs an Arcane Soul. So here you're going to use Meditation to get your Arcane Souls back up. And then you're going to use Arcane Spirit. And it's going to give you a buff for 20 seconds. Keep in mind is that you can actually boost this. We will talk about skills more in the links below because they are quite complicated. But if you go down to the ability, which is located here, you can reduce the cooldown quite significantly. Or, as you can see, it's 2% per cooldown rotation. You can do 6% status rotation. So if you put there, it'll actually, I believe it lasts like 30 seconds instead of like 20. So you can actually keep it up half the time. Okay, so next up, let's talk about a bit more CC. So in here we have Binding. So Binding basically makes an enemy get stunned. So let's use it on this enemy over here. There we go, he's now frozen in place. Then you can freeze him, you can use Crescendo, you can use Ice Arrow, then you can follow up by Ice Spear, and then freeze him again, followed up by Ice Fit, and then followed up by Wall to freeze him again. Basically, you can just keep freezing on a rotation. It's not something you generally want to do against a single mob though, but keep in mind the rotation, especially when you're doing AoE mobs in a dungeon. So next up, let's have a look at Blinding Light. So, causes intense light to blind all targets in range and reduces the caster's threat. Very helpful because we're going to be doing huge AoE abilities. We're going to be pulling a lot of threat, so we really don't want to pull the mobs on us, otherwise you're going to instantly die. Blind significantly reduces the physical magical accuracy of the target. Again, this helps because as a mage, you're going to want to group mobs together, and it's going to make it a lot easier on the tank and the healer when they're taking a lot less damage. Again, this costs an Arcane Soul. As you might have noticed, Arcane Souls are used for a lot of abilities, and you're going to want to micromanage it. If anything, that is probably the hardest part of the Mage class, micromanaging what to use your Arcane Souls on and what not to. Next up, let's have a look at the Ice Shield. So the Ice Shield basically puts you in an immune state. Now you can use this to dodge boss abilities. Let's say, for example, a boss is going to use a huge AoE. You'll hit this, stand inside the AoE, wait for it to happen, and then once it happens, you can stand close to the boss and then completely dodge all the ability's damage. Note though, it has a long cooldown, so if you don't know the boss mechanics, probably not a good idea to do that. Okay, so meditation. Meditation, it basically gives you 3 Arcane Souls, which you use for everything else. So you basically want to spam this on cooldown because it is such great efficiency because of all the Arcane Souls that you get out of it. Okay, next up is Recharge. Unfortunately, Recharge uses 2 Arcane Souls. This may be changing global. I kind of hope it is because it is quite annoying having to use 2 Arcane Souls to get your mana back. But the fact is, it gets your mana back, which you really need. So use it when you have to, but don't spam it unlike you would other classes because you do need the Arcane Souls. Okay, next up, let's have a look at Breakout. So, Breakout, it discharges energy to remove all statuses that impair movement, knockdown, stuns, blinding from the caster. This is basically a get out of free jail card, just like the Archer has, and after you do this, then you can use the combination of Static Shock and Lightning Shift to get an immense distance away from the enemy. Okay, so right now, let's have a look at Blizzard. So we're going to use Meditation. That'll give us 3 stacks, and then we're going to get a 4th stack. Okay, he has 3 stacks on him. Now we get a 4th stack because we hit an enemy using Flame Burst while they had Burn on them. So let's kill him. Okay, so now we're sitting on 4 Arcane Souls. We're now going to use Blizzard on this enemy over here. Basically a big AoE freeze. I was not close enough to pull it off there, but it's another AoE freeze that you're going to be using in enemies in a party. But it's not something you're going to be using very often because it has a large cooldown and it does use 4 Arcane Souls. If you have multiple mages in a party, generally the rotation of using Ice Hammer, Ice Arrow combination followed up by Ice Field and Ice Wall and Glaciers will be more than enough freezes. And that way you're going to want to be focusing your charges on something like Meteor, for example. Okay, so let's have a look at Inspire and Arcane Shield. So Inspire slightly increases the status accuracy of the target. Some people are probably thinking status accuracy? Huh? So status accuracy is the chance to apply a status effect. For example, Ignite has a 99.7% chance of applying a burn buff to an enemy. But some other abilities don't have quite that high. For example, Burning Pillar only has a 90% chance, right? So if you use this buff, you then have a higher chance to actually hit enemies. It doesn't show up here, but you do have a higher chance, so it's a very powerful buff. Perhaps not as strong as the accuracy buff from the Archer, but again, very welcome into dungeons. So next up, let's have a look at Arcane Shield. So Arcane Shield creates an Arcane Shield around the caster with ancient powers. Arcane Shield reduces the amount of casting gauge reduction from enemy interruption. Basically, what this means is when you're casting an ability, say for example, Fireball. Fireball takes 1.5 seconds to cast. But if you get attacked while casting this, it'll increase how long it takes to cast the ability. So getting attacked while using the ability, big no-no. Arcane Shield will actually stop this from happening, or will reduce it. Personally, this may work in PvP, but if you're getting hit in PvE as a mage while casting abilities, you've already goofed somewhere. So you're going to want to fix the issue, the fact that you're getting hit, rather than trying to fix the issue that you're already getting hit. Okay, so I believe that covers the basic abilities for the AoE rotations, the support abilities, and the single target abilities for the Mage class. Okay, so the advanced classes for the Mage would be Wizard, Sorcerer, and Witch. So Wizard, first up, would have Arcane Shield, which increases attack, critical attack, attack speed, and reduces skill cooldowns when using Arcane Shield. So before, when I mentioned that Arcane Shield isn't really worth it, and you shouldn't have goofed off to the point where you needed to use it in the first place, Wizard makes it an effective skill, so it's definitely worth using at this point. So, Surging Flame. Swings a wand imbued with the power of fire and inflicts damage at max of 4 times consecutively by exploding fire. Damage increases with each attack, and the skill can be stopped by pressing the escape key. Cost 2 arcane souls. So basically, after you do your freeze combo and the tank has pulled them all in, and you have them in really tight, you're going to want to use the Surging Flame combination along with the Burning Pillar and Fire Stream to do a lot of AoE damage. There are some other AoE combos that you can be doing, but that's probably the most powerful one that I can think of. Next up is the Burning Pillar, as I just mentioned. So the Awakened class creates a fire zone and inflicts immobilization field on all targets within range. Basically, it puts an AoE fire dot on everyone in range. So the closer you can get them together, the more effective your Surging Flame and your Burning Pillar and Fire Stream are going to be. That's the basic combination you're going to be using after you use your freezes. So next up is the Sorcerer. So the Sorcerer is a little bit weird in my personal opinion. First up is your Dash. It's an instant teleport ability to the front of the target and inflicts damage with a lightning attack. Successful attacks may stiffen the enemy. So you could use this with Static Shock. For example, you could dash towards them, then use Static Shock to jump back and have a decent chance of stiffening the enemy. This maybe work on some bosses, it could be effective, but generally as a mage, your job in dungeons would be to AoE freeze and AoE damage mobs, so generally not something I think would be very helpful in dungeon runs. So next up, let's have a look at Call Lightning. Collects lightning and shoots it at the target and inflicts Call Lightning. A lightning bolt strikes the target with Call Lightning and inflicts damage to all targets within range. May inflict additional damage to targets in Chronic Shock. So basically, if they're already stiffened on shock, then you may do more damage to them. So it can be used while moving, and it has an AoE damage, so it is a really powerful ability, but unfortunately it's an exclusive ability, so you can only use it when you're in the Sorcerer's page. So, powerful in of itself, but is this enough to be worth playing the Sorcerer over the Wizard? In my personal opinion, no. Next up, let's have a look at the Awakened Ice Field. So Ice Field, as we showed earlier, you combine it with Ice Wall to allow you to freeze mobs. If you awaken it, it says if the Ice Field for over 3 seconds in the awakened state, the Icebound is applied and they are frozen. So basically, Ice Field will then be able to AoE freeze mobs by itself without needing the multiplier Ice Wall. This is kind of powerful, I suppose. But the thing is that Ice Wall is on a lower cooldown than Ice Field is anyway. So you're going to be able to use your Ice Wall more often than you're going to be using Ice Field. And you wouldn't use Ice Wall without Ice Field to begin with. So you're always going to have this combination when Ice Field comes up. So you're effectively going to cost a little bit more mana, a little bit more time. But you're getting the AoE freeze combination without having to go into the Sorcerer's Tree. So while it is a powerful ability, I personally don't think it's really required, and you already have so many other freezes to begin with. So because of this, I don't think Sorcerer can compare to a Wizard, because a Wizard just does more damage, which is what you need because your kit already has so many freezing mechanics. So personally, if you want to play Sorcerer, I'd say that's okay, because you have an AoE and a bit of dash and have an extra freeze, that's okay, but I don't believe it's going to be as effective as a Wizard, personally. So, a Witch. Inflicts damage to the target with a Hand of Flames. If the target has burn 1, burn 2, and burn 3, explodes burn, gives blood burn. Basically, after you've used your single target rotation on them and given them burn buffs, you can then use this to do extra damage to them. Could be helpful in PvP. I don't really see it helpful in PvM very much. Next up is Weaken. Absorbs the target's MP, reducing the target's status evasion and status effectiveness, increasing your status hit rate. Personally, I'm not sure if this actually works on bosses, but even if it does, I would say it's not that powerful to begin with. In PvP, it could be really awesome alongside this ability here, but in PvE, I'd avoid it personally. Alright, so next up is Ice Shield. So, when the Ice Shield ends or is cancelled with Awakened State, a shield is given that reduces the amount of damage received. Now, if you're having to use an Ice Shield and then needing AoE, then needing protection after you've gotten out of it, you've goofed off and you've either used it too quickly, or you've used it when a boss is going to use multiple combinations, which you shouldn't have used it in the beginning. So again, not used in PvE, something that could be used in PvP if that is what you are into. So overall, I would go the Wizard or the Sorcerer. Okay, so, Astels. This may be a little bit of an unpopular opinion, but personally, I am a bit of a fan of Lyra. Now, Lyra isn't necessarily as powerful as some of the other Astels for a mage, but the reason I like Lyra is because it reduces your cooldowns. So if you summon Lyra, you'll see here that I have a 20-second cooldown and a 15-second cooldown. So it's taking a couple seconds off each of your abilities. So it's actually quite helpful and allows you to use more freezes and more burning debuffs and get them up quicker if you fail to hit them on a single mob. It also has the ability to give reduced cooldowns to other people in your party, although it has a massive cooldown. It's also not the most effective astel exactly, but personally I'm a fan of it because I like lower cooldowns. Okay, so next up, let's have a look at Glacier. So Glacier is someone that I mention consistently, but there is a very good reason for it. As I showed earlier on, there's a lot of different freeze combinations, and Glacier allows you to freeze again. It basically has an AoE freeze. So you could go freeze, 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 and then Glacier freeze. Now, if you had two mages in a party, or perhaps even a couple other people in the party that have Glacier, you can basically AoE freeze mob permanently. You may not be able to permanently do it, as in keep them frozen for like 30 seconds straight, but you're going to freeze them so often that you're going to be able to pull, for example, 10 mobs instead of 5. And for a mage, every mob that's closer, the more AoE damage you're going to do, so it's the better off way of clearing dungeons. Okay, so there are some other astels, like some healing astels and other astels that you can use to do some more damage on the mage, but personally, Lyra and Glacier are my favorites when it comes to the mage. If you have any other suggestions for the mage astels, please do let me know. I am very interested in the astels as they are the best part of Astellia in my personal opinion. That's it for today's video. If you did enjoy the video, please do hit that subscribe button above. If you're looking for an MMO community, do consider joining our community Varietymmos, where we focus on community inclusion, guides, and community events. Thanks for watching, guys. Peace.